Hey everybody, welcome to the Promotional Rescue talk show. I'm Melanie Vesey, stand-up comedian, actress, and filmmaker, and this is my talk show. It is my goal to talk to people about how they self-promote themselves because I just want people to not feel gross about self-promotion. So we're going to have these conversations to just start normalizing these conversations around self-promotion. So this is how it's going to work. I'm going to talk with my guest about their best tips and tricks on what they do to promote themselves and their projects. Then, over on my Patreon, I'm going to be talking with them about the best and the worst thing that's ever happened to them promoting online. So, if you want more information about me, what I do, my comedy, my specials, my films, all that stuff, you can see my stuff at melanievesey.com. Or if you want to know more about my services, who I've worked with, what I do, you can also go to promotionalrescue.com. All that information is right there. So without further ado, I'm so excited to be talking to this lady. I adore her. Our relationship started on Twitter, so we are a true online success story. She is a feature writer for Mel Magazine. You can see her stuff on her YouTube, her show Important Adults, to which I am also on, also Ill Repute, and then you can also read her incredible poem. She's doing 100 poems in solitude, which is up on her Patreon. Please give a warm welcome to my amazing pal, Sovereign Syre. Woo! Look,
Yay!
I'm doing it like it's a comedy show. And Savi's also a comedian. She's opened for
Yes.
Mark Maron. She's toured all over the place. I mean, what doesn't she do? That's the $1 million question.
Yeah. I
I'm
mean,
so glad you're here.
they probably should do like a Sovereign Does porn parody or something because I do
Oh,
literally
and
do
I
everything.
I didn't even mention that she's an adult film star. I let completely.
Well, I'm kind of retired at this point,
Yeah.
so I have an OnlyFans, just like Bella Thorne and other multimillionaires. Um, I have an OnlyFans, but I'm not active anymore. But I feel like it's important to let people know that so that if they Google me, they don't do it at work. So it's more just like a PSA, like, hey, I've also starred in several controversial films. So, just be aware that if you Google me that, that can come up. So maybe don't do it at work or on the family computer.
Yes, yes. But they're
So
gonna
it's
see
more
some good
just like
stuff.
looking out for you. But
I
I feel
remember
like
one.
that's like a thing I have, a unique thing I can offer tips for in terms of promotion is if you do find yourself being someone that does multiple things. I have been on the forefront of having two different careers for a long time, and one that's notoriously stigmatized. And
Yes.
I found ways around it. So if you're that person watching this, if you're a person that's been involved in adult or any kind of field that seems to be at odds with other stuff, there are totally tips and tricks to dealing with like how to do that, how to promote yourself when you're doing like a drastic change, perhaps, maybe,
It's
you know what I
actually
mean?
more
Maybe you
common
could,
than
yeah.
not. I mean, people come to me all the time, and it's so funny because sometimes people come to me and they think that these things are really like conflicting. They're like, "So listen, I write, but I also act." And I'm like, "That's okay. Those two things, those are under your umbrella of your brand. That's totally fine. But it's not like you are a psychiatrist who also wants to be a professional hula hooper. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
okay. So why don't you actually address that? Why don't you actually talk about the conflict of that? Because I feel like people are a lot of people are multi-hyphenate and they get very hung up. Like, do I have separate, websites and social media accounts? Like, how did you handle the differences between those two worlds?
Well, you have to look at yourself like, it's Alyssa Edwards says something along the lines of if you want to sell tickets, like you can't sell tickets if you wouldn't buy a ticket to the show, right? So it's like in anything that you're doing when you're envisioning your brand or anything else, the most important thing is that like you see how it can happen. So you have to have a vision for how that transition would look, and the biggest thing for me is every day I would wake up and I would think about how I envisioned this future career. And I came up with this narrative for myself, which is, oh, I'm like this bohemian girl that did adult films, but was very artsy and had a writing background, and then sort of parlayed that into writing about these things. And then writing is naturally part of stand-up. It's part of performance. And so I had the story in my own head first of, and that kind of informs the way I promote myself. So that as I started doing other things, when I started doing stand-up or I started writing, my fan base was like, of course she would. Of course you would. Why wouldn't you? Because you're the cerebral smart porn girl. So from the time I was doing porn, I was imagining a transition out. I never looked at it as though porn was going to be my primary career. It was the job offer I got that paid the most money and made the most sense in my life at the time. Because it allowed me to have more time to work on things like writing, stand-up, etc. A lot of kids rely on having a trust fund. I didn't have that. So I had to figure out how I was going to support my creative habit. But so I always had an eye towards that this was not going to be all I did. So when I was on Twitter and on Instagram, while there were things that were more lucrative in the short term, say if I marketed myself as a dumb whore, which fit in with expectation. I had directors say, can you be more of a dumb whore on Twitter? Can you please? I had agents too. Can you please just dumb it down on Twitter? And I said, no. And this is why, is because while in the short term, that would have made more sales because it would have fit in with an expectation about what adult performers look like and sound like and the fantasy of that. But I understood that in terms of my long-term success, it made more sense to take a longer time to build a kind of customer and a kind of client that was willing to see a sex worker as a multifaceted kind of person. And so it took me longer to build my fan base, but they're much more loyal, and none of them have not been supportive of me doing other things. And I've been able to take a client that was a fan of my adult films and now is also a supporter on my Patreon, as an invested in my poetry project, will go to my stand-up comedy shows, will buy my merch, all of this stuff. Because I thought long term. So that would be like two of the big tips would be think you have to buy a ticket to your own show first.
Yeah.
You have to have a vision for how you're going to get there, because that's what you're going to rely on day in and day out. It's like, you have to see, you can't just be like, I wish I could make $1 million. Like, you have to see how you would do it.
Right.
And have that in your head. Like, because then you start thinking it is possible through daily affirmations. And the second thing is to think long-term, to not be short-sighted. There are lots of ways to get quick and easy promotion. You need to think long-term. And I think that's a strategy thing. It's a strategy thing, because some people are like, fuck it, go get on a reality show.
Exactly.
You'll have all eyes on you, and then just parlay it into whatever. And that is one strategy. I just think that strategy relies a lot more on luck. And I think that it's safer to think long-term and make sure that the things that you're doing for promotion are things that are going to reach an audience that actually cares about you and the kind of stuff that you do.
Exactly. I really like, when I'm working with clients, my first order of business when I'm working with clients, they always want to talk about their social media, and I'm like, let's back it up, and I want you to write down a description of what you do and or your bio. Because if you can't talk about what you're doing, if you can't put it into a sentence, then how is your audience going to know, right? So if it starts with you, the disconnect is with you and between your ears, right? So how do we have that elevator pitch of like who we are, what we're doing? And then that way you can transmit it to an audience. I'm also, when I'm working with artists, always trying to unplug all the urgency, like slow it down. You'll get more longer term, because they're always like, I have to do this now, or this is what I need now. And it's like, oh my God, that makes people make so many bad decisions. It also doesn't leave enough time to promote properly. Like, people contact me and they're like, so my event's this Saturday. And I'm like, oh my God, like I can't help you. We should have been talking a month ago. You know what I mean? And so always less urgency, longer periods of time will always help you sink in that stuff longer term, and always and also better rewards on the back end, right? Like you're talking about that loyal customer that's not shocked when you say, hey guys, I've written a book, you know, or
Yeah.
come to this, come do this. They know what to do. You're helping train them and understand. And then those people, if they're not with you or on board with you, they're not going to do dumb shit, like say shit, dumb shit, troll you, whatever. They're people that are already in line with you and what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to consider is like when you and I have talked about Patreon, I said, you know, make sure that you make your rewards so that you're not creating busy work for yourself.
Yes.
But the same goes for where and how you promote. You know, it's very tempting to be like, well, TikTok's really big right now. Got to get on TikTok. Or like YouTube, I've got to get a YouTube channel. And it's important to stop and look at what is naturally easy for you. Because if you don't think of on the fly kind of forgettable content, i.e. TikTok, you're going to be spending all of this time struggling to create content that is not your brand.
Exactly.
To get noticed by people on a platform that is like, you're creating more stress for yourself just to promote, and that's taking away energy and time from what you do. Whereas like for me, I'm really great at Twitter because Twitter is a format for people that like to read. It's a reader's format. It's for people that like to engage with ideas, you know? So Twitter is like, it's easy for me. And when I encounter someone that says like, yeah, I got to get on Twitter, I'm like, no, you don't. Like, what are you good at? Do you know what I mean? Like, cause if I go look at their Instagram, like, but your Instagram is killing it. Like it's okay to not be everywhere. And I think a lot of people feel tempted to be everywhere. And it's like, you just need to find the thing you're good at and just fucking kill it.
Yeah.
Like just kill that,
yeah,
you know, because if it's natural for you, you won't get burned out.
Yeah, I do disagree with that just a tiny bit because here's the thing. You are amazing at Twitter. I am not insane at Twitter for whatever reason, but I do tell people just be there and have it be current. That's all. You don't have to have a million followers.
That's different from trying to tackle Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's fine to like, even if it's just like, if you're not good at Twitter, just have it auto update from your Instagram because it at least will get people from Twitter over to where you are
exactly.
active,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Just so it's fine to like have a presence everywhere, but like to worry about having to be like all things on all platforms is you're just going to end up exhausting yourself, and you're going to end up resenting. You're going to end up resenting the people that engage with you because you're going to be so stressed out and exhausted by these exchanges. And so it's also just important to line up with what you are. I mean, if you're a fashion designer, then you need to be on Instagram. Yeah. That's where you need to be. Like, there's no reason for you to be on Twitter other than to direct people to your Instagram because you make a visual product, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's important there. And, you know, like a lot of people, and then understanding what works on what platforms. For example, YouTube started out as a place where there was almost kind of like scripted stuff. And when I first had a show on there, Boss Bitches of History, for the Wisecrack channel, we were writing out scripts, and there was an element of production in the shows, and we would be narrating these animated segments. And what Wisecrack has become and what YouTube has become is what is successful there tends to be long form, either like video essays or vlogs. So understanding what kind of content does well on a platform is also important. So that some of the most popular formats are entrepreneurship, how-tos, makeup tutorials, how to build stuff, unboxing, mukbang. So they're like, almost all of them are elements of personality and either review or tutorial. Yes. So, you know, like that, if that's the kind of product you're selling, YouTube is the place for you. Whereas say if you're a comedian, maybe TikTok is better at demonstrating that you're really good at on the fly coming up with funny material quickly. That's a great advertisement for you if you're a comedian or a comedy writer. It's a great way to show potential employers and fans, like, I can work fast and I can make funny stuff on the fly and have it be relevant and have an ability to make something go viral. That's a great advertisement for like a comedy writer that wants to get on Last Week Tonight or something like that. Sarah Cooper just got her Netflix special on doing
I
her Trump's
know.
lip
So
syncs, right?
incredible. So
But
incredible.
what it demonstrated is like that she's funny on the fly, because she would take speeches that he had just made and she would do it and put it together. And that was demonstrating the skill set for the job she wanted.
Yes.
And so that's the other thing to keep in mind is that when you're promoting, you are also demonstrating what you do.
Exactly.
So you want to pick the platform that is the best for showcasing what it is you do. So if Sarah was doing that stuff on YouTube, it probably wouldn't have gone viral because the audience on YouTube isn't necessarily looking for this quick stuff. They're looking for a Jeffree Star makeup tutorial, or they're looking for like an unboxing where someone's going to unbox a new toy and show how it works and be funny and engaging while they do it. Right. It's like, that's that person. And then Instagram is like, again, if you're doing fashion, you're designing products, or for me, when I'm selling my OnlyFans membership, that's a place to go post selfies and things like that. It's a visual medium. That's the place to shine. I'm not trying to engage with people's thinking. I'm trying to engage with their like immediate sort of desire response. And then when I'm promoting comedy stuff and my writing, I go to Twitter because that's where people go to read stuff.
And then in this process, so essentially what we're saying is you've really got to go in to you to figure out what you do best and work towards your strengths, and don't let the tail wag the dog, right? Don't be pulled over here and over there. Like, what is it that you really want to do? How can you put that into words, right? So you can actually say it out loud, right? So you can actually like be, and I like to think of and I hate this term kind of, but like, I feel like the internet is kind of like a vision board, right? So it's like in what you're doing, you're putting it out there, activating those molecules so people connect you with that, and then they can bring you whatever to the next thing. And so I feel like when you were first starting all of this, did you question what you were doing? And like, what was that moment when you finally realized, oh, I do this over here, I do that over there? Like, did you have a moment like that, or what was your process on that?
I mean, it was kind of organic. Like it wasn't like I just was naturally really savvy at this stuff. Like I said, like I was kind of getting it on the ground floor. I don't know many porn performers that have branched out successfully into doing other things. I can think of a few. Aaliyah Janine is one that has become a successful comic, but she's retired. So even the people I know that have come from this world and done stuff like, say, a Sasha Grey or Aaliyah Janine, they also were like also retired when they did it. So they still weren't necessarily encountering like the same hurdles, right? Like I found myself in a position of I'm trying to actively promote an active adult performing career, and I'm trying to promote an active stand-up comedy career,
right,
and writing. So a lot of it was new, and I really did struggle at first because, I started to get followers on Twitter where I had, like these famous people following me that knew me as a comedian. And suddenly I started to feel really sheepish about promoting porn on this feed because Dave Foley from Kids in the Hall follows me. And like, do I, you know what I mean? Like I started to feel like self-conscious about it. And even for a while, I actually retired from adult for a while to focus on doing stand-up because I really started to feel like you just could not do both.
How did you tackle that? How did you tackle that feeling where you wanted to kind of shut down this part of you that was how you earned and was a major part of you? Like, how did you juggle the two of them?
Me and Dave Foley were hanging out, and he, as a throwaway comment, I was like, and Nundy was like, I 100% don't mind seeing your ass on Twitter. And it's not like, he said, it's not like I don't know what you do.
Yeah.
It's not like I followed without knowing like what you are.
Right.
And that led to a further discussion about the genie in the bottle and having faith in myself that, like that whole thing about if you're going to sell a ticket to the show, like you got to buy that ticket. So it was like, how could I be selling the idea that like, yes, I'm a comedian and I do porn and that's okay.
Yes.
How can I be selling a ticket to that show when I'm not even buying the ticket?
Yes.
When I'm going like, oh, I can't do it. And so I had to go into myself and be like, do you really believe that it's possible for you to do both or not? And I
Yes.
had to have that moment with myself. And that's why I say my tip at the beginning was that like you need to create the narrative for yourself, and like you need to
Yes.
really believe the story, because that's what you're selling. You're not selling a product, you're not even selling a skill set, you're selling a story, and the story is
Yes.
about you.
I
um,
love this. And I feel like this is so good for people to hear because when I'm working with clients, most of the time, what I'm actually helping them with is not like a strategy on sharing on Instagram. I'm usually helping them with their personal operating system. What's going on inside their minds, their hearts, and their gut with their resistance to what they're doing, or they don't believe in it or whatever. Like that's usually at the root of that. So what was amazing was you questioned it, and sometimes we do need that outside help, somebody to say, hey, I'm actually cool with it. And like, well, if you're cool with it, I guess maybe I could be cool with it too. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it has to happen from the outside in too, to help us
yeah.
get that validation that it's like, and then, but wait, yeah, that it is okay for this to, it is okay for these two things to happen in my world because I believe it can happen. And yes, it can happen. And then it did for you. I mean, it did.
Yeah. And then I also had to think about how to integrate those things. And I realized that part of the difficulty for me in integration was that when I was working for other companies and as being an adult performer, I didn't have 100% control over my brand, because they'll market you however they want to.
Exactly.
And so a big step was like in figuring out, in order to do this, I have to pivot in a way where I'm 100% in control of the kind of porn that I'm putting out there and how it's being marketed. And so at first it wasn't like I just joined an OnlyFans and suddenly I was making tons of money. But I started being honest with my porn clients and saying, I need safe for work only elements if you want me to promote. And you can't use this kind of language or I won't promote it because it's not in line with my brand. And they were so responsive.
Amazing.
Like, oh, okay, sure. Well, absolutely. Because I just said, listen, I do a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And for my purposes, I need things to be fairly safe for work.
Yes.
Because I do have a big cross section of people. And, you know, some of my fans have never seen my adult work and are not interested in it. And so if you want me to promote on this feed, like I need to be aware of those people.
Yeah.
Because, and so people but porn companies were responsive and they started making me elements that were safe for work. And they, you know, I would just tell them, if you use this kind of language in tweets, like if you call me a slut or this, like things that would be acceptable in porn world, like they're not acceptable for me and my brand. And they would facilitate that. And then I also actively started trying to, whenever I could write scenes, I would start writing scenes so that I was having more control over my brand. And so in that sense, like when it was out of my control, I was communicating with the people hiring me to make sure that like we were on the same page. And then eventually I got to the point where I was just working for myself, which has allowed me to now promote in a way that aligns with the rest of the work that I do. But a big part of it was internal work. It was me just like recognizing my own internalized whorephobia and judgment and going, if I don't work through this, how can I teach my audience how to work through it?
Exactly. And I feel like to greater or lesser degree, so many people bring something to the table, not exactly like what you experience, but something to the table that's in their mind that stops them from moving forward. Whether that's something that someone
look at differences between, say, people like Lady Gaga and David Bowie going from music to acting and being very well received versus, say, someone like Mariah Carey doing acting and getting just lampooned, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just about porn. There are certain hierarchies, or Jeremy Piven or John Mayer trying to do stand-up, right?
Exactly.
There are many people that want to try. And so when you start to look at like who somehow is able to pivot that successfully and then who is not, like J-Lo was somehow able to pivot from actress to musician, which is probably, I would think, notoriously the most difficult.
Yeah.
Like the most difficult transition, I think, is from being an actor to suddenly being a musician. People just don't buy it. Musicians can get away with switching over to acting a lot easier. Yeah. Still not easy, but
well, because you can't you can't fix. I mean, songs have to be good.
Yeah.
It is a very difficult medium to fake in post. Like, so. Jesus, that's hard.
Well,
So
and
yeah.
I think that when it comes to brand awareness, I think that a big part of whether or not we like music has to do with the image of the musician. There's a
Mm,
lot of investment around authenticity
mm,
and character and persona.
mm.
And so when a musician goes into acting, a lot of times the first few roles they play, they're essentially playing a version of themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whereas actors, like their persona and brand may be, you know, either undeveloped or something that's like really saccharine and like not associated with sort of maybe something more gritty or sensitive like we
Yeah.
expect from a musician. So when they start doing songs, we don't believe them.
Yeah, exactly. It's also the person when you're doing acting, you're clearly somebody else's vision. You morph. And then when they come forward with who they are, it might be conflicting to what somebody else might perceive them as. And then essentially at the end of the day, what we're saying is you have to help your audience understand who you are. And if you don't buy in for what you're selling, they're not going to buy in. They're not going to understand. They're not going to know where to go. They're not going to know what to do. Like, you do have to help them, and that's the process. So amazing. So the two things that we covered was understanding who you are. Oh, hi, Lola.
She's here.
This is what I love about 2020 is I get to see everybody's animals in a Zoom. Cats, dogs, rabbits. I love it. Hi.
Go on, Mama. Go on. I know. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your input.
Thank you for visiting.
Yeah.
So essentially, like, ultimately, it comes down to you. Can you put this into words, into a vision, into a message that you can deliver to an audience so they can come on board? And then also, too, taking the urgency out of everything. More time. More time is going to help you do a better job, make better decisions, and acquire better things in the end. I mean, I'm probably screwing up the meme, but, someone said, it takes 3 weeks to make a Toyota, but it makes 6 years to make a Rolls Royce. You know what I mean? So how do we invest the time in this and know that it does take time, and that if even if it's not happening right away, it doesn't mean it won't happen, right? So you need the time to help you cross that finish line so that you feel as best as you possibly can.
Yeah. And to remember too that I was talking to Josh Barra, who's was a PR person for Disney and stuff like that. He had always said, the number one thing I would tell clients is the easiest way to deal with a scandal is if you had never said it in the first place. And
oh my God.
That's something to remember about urgency, right? Which is, once you put it out there, it's out there. I was just watching a documentary series on YouTube interviewing people that became memes and having them just kind of narrate that experience. And every single one kept saying the same thing. They're like, if I was going to give advice to anyone that finds themselves made into a meme, just like you have no control over it. It's out. It's done. You have to immediately abandon the idea that you have any control over your image or what people are doing with it. It's done. It's out there. And that's important to remember when people feel an urgency to do promo and all this kind of stuff, is that like, once it's out there, it's out there forever. But the internet will be there forever. So, even though you look at a Vine or a viral TikTok that you're like, oh, that looks like they made it in 6 minutes and they just threw it up there. That happens sometimes, but that could also be something that they were working on for 3 months. And then it looks like it's quickly done. And so it's important to remember that, in rushing to put stuff out and not taking the time to make it good, once it's out, there's no do-overs. I mean, you can occasionally delete tweets and retweet, but they always just are going to lose impact.
Yes.
Agreed. And so it's important to just know who you are and to like have a kind of a plan. And the reason that having a narrative and thinking of yourself as like a story as opposed to a thing is that things are always changing. Cultural trends are always shifting. There are always new platforms. It's hard to stick to a plan because life changes. Like you can have a campaign strategy or a brand strategy, and that's fine. And it's okay to have guideposts, but they're always going to shift because life happens. But when you have just a narrative, like the story of you, it's kind of like anything goes, and it's a lot easier to stick to the story of you.
Yes.
So if my thing is, I'm a super educated bohemian girl that has done sex work, but also is interested in history and is really interested in like cultural critique through a feminist lens, specifically dealing with people from marginalized communities like sex workers. Kind of that story is a lot easier to stick to than like I'm a comedian now and I do comedy, or I'm a YouTuber now and I do YouTube. That story can follow me anywhere, right? Because that's the story of me.
Yeah.
And that no matter what my campaign strategy is for a particular project, I can always go back to like the story of my brand and just make sure that what I'm doing aligns with that story. And it's like that, because that's really what you're selling. So even with a Patreon, instead of it being like support the Patreon and support this podcast, it's support the Patreon and support the project of me. I do a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So when you're throwing money at it each month. So right now in quarantine, my podcast is on hiatus, but I'm doing this poetry project. My fans know that I have an MFA in creative writing and poetry. So for them, it makes sense. And I've been writing poems. So they get a poem a day or a day-ish and poetry readings. And that has taken the place of the podcast. And I haven't lost any patrons.
Yes.
They're still getting content. And sometimes when the podcast isn't on, what they get is I'll be uploading clips of me doing open mics and stand-up. And because they're there for like the narrative of me and like the project of whatever Sovereign's doing, they don't unsubscribe because suddenly they're not getting the podcast. So their fanship isn't connected to particular projects that I do. Their fanship is connected to like the idea of what I do, which is basically kind of talking about, you know, sort of a marginalized and sort of strange aspect of the human condition. Like a lot of people are they're curious about sex work. They don't know a lot about the lives of sex workers.
Yeah, they love behind the scenes. They love getting behind the scenes.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff I write for Mel Magazine looks at issues affecting sexual culture or sex work, usually through a historical lens and from a feminist perspective. A lot of the stand-up I do addresses, you know, being a sex worker, or like the experiences of that, or you know, the podcast is people really liked Ill Repute because they weren't used to hearing a perspective on history from people that have worked in sex work. So to have a sex worker talking about a famous courtesan, they get this whole different point of view that they just aren't used to. Yeah. And that novelty of that is appealing because, you know, and so no matter what aspect, no matter what I'm doing, whether it's podcasting, stand-up, actual adult content, or poetry or whatever, it's like they always know what they're going to get.
Yes.
You know, and they've decided, and I've groomed an audience that is interested in that point of view and finds it valuable.
Exactly.
You know,
and they've bought in, and that's essentially,
and you know what happens, because I'll get people going, I would love for you to do it. I want to hear the Ill Repute about, what was the last one they were asking about? The painter, famous Mexican painter. Why is her name escaping me right now?
Oh, Frida Kahlo. Yeah.
When I started getting people tweeting me going, I want to hear the Ill Repute about Frida Kahlo. I want to hear the Ill Repute.
Amazing.
They knew what point of view they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
Right? They wanted to hear like me and Susie Q's point of view about this like standard historical figure. And that's when you know you've done something right, is when you start getting people that are wanting, or they're like, when I'm talking with other comics, and when I think it was like Marin turned to me, he's like, so what's your take on the Me Too stuff? What do you do? And he wasn't saying, what do you think about Me Too? He was like, what material are you doing about it? Yeah. Because he wanted to know what's a sex worker going to say about it? Yes. Like that he was curious, like what I was doing with it on stage. Right. And that's another sign that you're doing something right, when someone is interested in like your take on it. That lets you know that like you have a unique take.
Yeah,
and exactly. You have something
And then, so let's talk about that more, because I want to talk more about the best and the worst thing that's ever happened to you, which is going to be over on my Patreon, patreon.com/Melanie Vesey. So thank you so much, Savi, for this chapter of your tips and tricks, to which we have boiled down to essentially, like, if you don't know what you're doing, they're not going to know what you're doing. And then just fucking slow your roll, people. Slow it down. The urgency gets everybody into trouble. So thanks for joining us. And now you can go over to the Patreon and listen to the steamy part of the do's and don'ts and the best and worst thing that's ever happened to Savi online. So thanks so much for joining us. Bye.
Bye.